All right,
What's
we're
up,
live.
dude?
How's it going?
Pretty good. Super excited for this chat today.
Yeah, indeed. So, as anyone that is a bit of a longtime listener might know, Zach and I are based out of Kansas City, Missouri. We're longtime residents of the area. And today we're extremely excited to welcome on a leader of Tenants, which is an anti-eviction organization. And they're doing such great work here in Kansas City, which has gained even national recognition from lots of outlets. And we're just
Jacobin,
super
Democracy
excited.
Now.
Indeed. And we're super excited to give them a super special spotlight on today's live stream. And like I said, just spotlight the really important work they're doing, fighting the violence of evictions and the state-sponsored cruelty therein. So, yeah, we're super excited.
Yeah, so I guess without further ado, are we good to go ahead and get our guest joined? Oh, you're off. You're muted, Gavin.
Oh, sorry about that. Yeah, absolutely. To introduce our guest, she's Tiana Caldwell, a leader and board president with Tenants. She became involved in the fight for housing justice when her family experiences homelessness for 6 months following an eviction and her second cancer diagnosis. Along with Diane Charity and Brandy Grandiose, Tiana helped to found Tenants. She's a licensed nurse and a community college instructor. And as you mentioned, Zach, she actually wrote a wonderful piece for Jacobin that was published earlier in 2019.
2020.
2020. You're right. And I quickly wanted to read a quote from that before we invite her on. That would be, "Let me be clear about something. I've been living in crisis for a lot longer than the pandemic period. 12 million people across the country spend half their paychecks on the rent. One, a flat tire or a sick kid is all that separates people like me from eviction or homelessness. Capitalism and racism have created the conditions for our complete inability to respond to COVID-19 with any semblance of humanity." Again, that's from Miss Tiana Caldwell in Jacobin magazine. And without further ado, we can introduce her onto the stream. How are you doing?
Hey, thanks so much for coming on today.
Thank you. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, we can hear you. All right. So I guess in order to go ahead and get started, if you could just go ahead and tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got involved with KC Tenants.
As it says, I started, I think Tara got a hold of, I just heard my husband who had spoken. I was actively in treatment with my second diagnosis for cancer, ovarian cancer, and we were in a desperate place. And her number came up in his research, and they made contact. And it's kind of funny because she always says that when she made contact with him, he was just like, "Okay, you probably need to talk to my wife." He said that I was a lot smarter than him, and this sounded like something for me. So, despite what I was going through at the time, it just really sounded like something special, and I wanted to know more about it. So we met up and talked about the things that I was going through. I was actively in the middle of an eviction. I had filled out paperwork with my property manager for the American Cancer Society. So I thought everything was in place. And me and my son, who was 11 at the time, were sitting in the waiting room. We were back there for some paperwork and things, and heard the property manager say, "I just don't want her to die in there." Took a phone call. So that kind of alarmed my son and kind of filled me with a little bit of doom. So finding KC Tenants when I did, or the chance to be a part of this was like, it was a chance to not only, try to do something for myself or to get, help with resources, but a chance to actually change things, which was the ultimate goal, right? Because I could get some assistance for right now or resources, but that would just be for the moment. This gave me a chance to change the system, which is the best way to go. So it doesn't happen to the people.
Absolutely. That's so important, and thank you for sharing. And as I mentioned, your quote, even before this pandemic hit, this has been a crisis situation for so many people, for so many communities. We talk about going back to normal, so to speak, to the pre-pandemic days, but even in the pre-COVID days, for most working families, it was only an emergency which separated them from complete financial ruin. So the work you guys have been doing is just so important. And again, especially with the pandemic and the increased importance and attention on evictions and preventing them in this time, the KC Tenants has gained national recognition for the work you guys have done. And I'm just wondering, as the leader and the board president with Kansas City Tenants, I'm just wondering if you could give us a picture of the kind of activism you guys are doing on a week-to-week basis, on what it looks like, who you're up against in the city, and really what kind of wins you guys have made recently or evictions stopped.
Well, I know that especially in this climate, I mean, when it started back in March, when they shut down the city, March 2020, our first thing was that, this is going to affect a lot of people. And how do we continue to do this work when things are shut down? And so we did start the Zoom meetings. We reached out across the state and created a statewide coalition where we did an action to take over I-70 from one side of the state to the other. So from here in Kansas City all the way across to St. Louis. We had people from Springfield, Rolla, Missouri, Warrensville, like all over the state of Missouri. And they came together with us and we took over I-70, which garnered a lot of attention. But we couldn't stop there, of course. And we started doing the research to look into what else we could do. And we came together and started building, helping other people organize as, people started to get further behind in rent. We were actively fighting for cancel rent, like not just local, but, statewide and national. So we were looking to garner some things behind that. And then as people did get further behind, evictions started going. They were not adhering to the CDC moratorium. They were evicting people anyway. And so we just decided we were gonna, show up and put ourselves between the people and those evictions. Back in October, we actually physically had people who went in and disrupted courts. We had 2 of our members who had actually gotten arrested. And, we were all out there all day until we could get them out. I mean, no charges, stayed with them, thank goodness. But we just kept thinking bigger and bigger. And so as we started moving towards Christmas time, Thanksgiving and Christmas time, we were just like, this is going to affect a lot of people. They were still pushing evictions through. Even in spite of the CDC moratorium, we took action with the ACLU to actually sue the judge that is responsible. They're still kind of out, I think, with that verdict. And so, we actually sued them. They weren't adhering to the CDC and the things that people were going through because of it. He actually had the power to put in place the moratorium and made sure that it could be enforced, and did so for a short time and then just decided not to continue it. So the fact that he put it in place the first time let us know that he knew that it was the right thing to do, and that he could do it if he wanted to. So we did take action there. And then as it started moving through Christmas and things were getting worse, we actually did we went Christmas caroling to the judges, to the new judge, Judge Young, to his house after he had gotten the position, was elected to the position, just so that we had changed the songs to carols so that they talked about what was going on and people being evicted and things like that, which kind of kicked off our Zero Eviction January action. And for all of January, we held actions every week, usually several a week, where we were outside the judges' houses, pleading. We would put on a rally and we were on microphones and we would share personal stories about what was going on, just to get the point across. And they did. They would call the police on us. We were nonviolent. Sometimes neighbors would join or want to know what was going on, and it was really warranted. And we even went so far as to chain ourselves to the courthouse doors. I was one of those people who did so to stop evictions because it's violent, especially in this climate. There are many people who have not been working this whole pandemic through no fault of their own. Things are shut down or not working in full capacity. Businesses and the people who work in those businesses are suffering. And we needed our government to show up for us. And since they didn't, we decided to take action and speak for ourselves. And so we have been shutting down eviction courts every week since back in October, even online as well as in person. So.
Yeah, I wanted to go ahead and ask you about that, and specifically about the kind of abdication of government officials. Obviously, KC Tenants, or for people who aren't aware, they were pretty involved in the election of Mayor Quentin Lucas. You guys campaigned very, hard for him. He made a lot of campaign promises, and a lot of people were really excited and looking forward to his election as it came to, him indicating support for a lot of tenants' rights. However, once he came into office, that hasn't necessarily been the case. Obviously, there was the Tenants Bill of Rights package, which hasn't passed. I'm wondering if you could, one, talk about, the obstacles that you've had and how you guys have worked to overcome that, and what you think the future would look like. Just to give some numbers to the audience really quickly for the scope of what's been asking, and you can speak to the difference that this would make in the Kansas City community. The Kansas City Police Department gets $260 million for this upcoming fiscal year. The ask from KC Tenants for the Tenants Bill of Rights package was $1.2 million, a mere fraction of that. So just for context for everybody about how much this is going to cost, the current Division of Housing and Community Development in Kansas City only receives $110,000 a year, if I'm not mistaken, which is just woefully inadequate. And there's been a lot of reports of them actually redirecting their individuals in crisis to KC Tenants volunteers to better assist them because they don't have the resources or the ability to assist them. So I'm just wondering if you could speak to that, please.
Yes, and we did do a lot we exposed everyone who was running for those positions, and we gave people the facts about what was really going on, especially our base, which was really big on housing and what was going on, because it's kind of the foundation of everything. You move people from survival to desperation, then, they'll do whatever they have to do to survive. And a lot of crime and things like that come out of that. So you have to start at the foundation of things, which housing is a big part of that. People need to feel stable. And so getting them into office, we did pass the Tenant Bill of Rights and the resolution overwhelmingly in council and through the mayor, but there's no enforcement. It came with the Office of the Tenant Advocate, and in order for it to work, that it needs, it needs to be fully funded. They have an advocate that is there. I think it's like 2 people who are working in this office, but we have an overwhelming need for this advocacy. And again, they're kind of funneling resources, and the city is actually funding those resources through our crisis hotline, which is unfair because we're not funded by the city and we don't hold those resources. The city has the resources, and then we check into those resources, and then it's just kind of disheartening to hear people on the other line in these crisis and tears, and they've been there, and they're telling them they're either on a waiting list or there's no more funding or any of that. I mean, even through the fact that even through the instance that the CARES Act monies had been released, like they were still saying that there was no funding there, or people were being put on wait lists. And this is a crisis that is you can't wait. It's happening now. These people will be out on the street if they don't get this help or find the resources that they need. And so the city knows that there is a huge demand for help in this situation, because those calls are being funneled back to us through those resources that are funded by the city. And in the way that we had campaigned for this to work is that the Office of the Tenant Advocate would, be able to hold landlords accountable, have their licenses taken if things happen, or fines and things like that. And it seems like every other outlet that deals with, like the health department that deals with the landlords or that have this power, just kind of keep giving them chances. And then people have to live in these conditions or live homeless. And so it's sad that we have passed legislature, but without the funding, what do we have? That means that the legislature is nothing.
Yeah, well, I wanted to talk a little bit more about the Tenants Bill of Rights, which was written and passed in Kansas City in December of 2019. It included a resolution and an ordinance. And as you've mentioned a little bit, despite the fact that it did pass, it hasn't really been enforced. I was wondering if you could just discuss a little bit more about what exactly the Tenant Bill of Rights entails, how it was passed, and what lessons maybe other organizations in other cities facing similar problems can learn in passing their own tenants' bill of rights?
The Tenants Bill of Rights touched on things that, most leases kind of cover, but it's depending. It's kind of from one landlord to another or from one lease to another. And so we wanted to pass something that affects us all, that was citywide. And so it speaks to things like, things that are vital in your home, like heat and air when it's hot and those type of things, and things that you need like water. And being able to heat that water and stuff. So if you have issues like that are immediate, that require immediate response, then there was a 24 to 48 hour period where that needed to be done. And if it was something where you couldn't be in the home, then the landlord would be responsible for putting them up and things like that. And it meant that there are certain standards that housing had to, live up to. With that, you need to have inspections, right? Those when people call for those things, and Healthy Homes was supposed to kind of help with that, with the inspections. But if we look at the record for Healthy Homes, it shows that they're just giving them chance after chance. And it's like, if they're not getting any consequences, why would they go in to fix any of those things or to make these things habitable? And as long as they are, and they get to enforce their right to rent, but there's no way for tenants to enforce that these things are getting done for them. You have people who are living with black mold that have small children or are pregnant and things like that, and they're in the hospital, in and out of the hospital from month to month because of the conditions that they're living in, and there's no enforcement in behind this. And then the people, the health department that do have some power already, or with or without enforcement, they show up and they give leniency to the landlord and continue to, and they seem to be, bothered by tenants calling them or continuing to call them out or making the same complaints. But that's the only outlet that you have right now. And so that's why we needed this Office of Tenant Advocate. That's why we needed it to be fully enforced and fully funded, so that, there is actual protections for tenants, because all of the laws on the books were directly towards the landlord. You pay the rent or else. It didn't matter if you had black mold or holes in your floor that were big enough for your kids to fall in, or rats or mice and all this stuff. It doesn't matter. It was only enforcing that if it was on an eviction that you owed money, it didn't matter what else was going on. They didn't even hear it. You were going to be evicted. You had to pay your rent. And it didn't matter what the landlord wasn't doing. I mean, that doesn't protect anybody who's living there. There are some conditions that people live in that they shouldn't have to pay rent if those conditions are present.
Yeah.
And so, to be able to argue in court meant nothing unless you could afford a lawyer. And in that, we were fighting for right to counsel. And of course, they wanted to cut that part out. But we do have a partnership with Heartland, who did get some money for counsel, and they have been a huge asset for the tenants in court.
Yeah, well, that's kind of the way that the judicial system in America works, right? You can either afford a lawyer or you lose without even, regardless, right? You could have the most obvious case in the world where you're living in a place that, is clearly unfit to be rented. And yet they're still going to just take one look at the paper. And if you're unrepresented, they're going to decide with the person who has, counsel. So obviously that discriminates against working class and impoverished individuals dramatically. I don't mean to pivot too hard because that's important, but I wanted to ask you about the broader issue of housing, particularly in places like Kansas City. So Kansas City is in the Midwest, right? We're not living in New York City. We're not living in Los Angeles. If you can't find affordable housing in the middle smack dab of America in Kansas City, Missouri, then that means it's not anywhere to be found. And, as three individuals who have searched for housing in Kansas City, I think we can all attest to the fact that there's a lot of those container-shaped buildings that are rising where rent is $2,000 for a studio, and they want to call that affordable housing because, it's under this certain threshold. Yeah, well, it's also 380 square feet. That's not affordable for a family. You can't raise a family in a 380 square foot home. And yet these people, these contractors and developers are trying to bid for affordable housing. They had a plan in Kansas City to have those like pod-sized rooms where it's like tiny apartments, and they're still like $1,200, and they were applying for affordable housing. So it's just ridiculous, right? And I'm just wondering if you could speak to how this is invading even a city like ours, which is supposed to be a working class city, a city that and was until recently, right? We talk about this on our show sometimes, right? People didn't want anything to do with Kansas City when I was a kid, right? My dad had a pager store on Truth that and nobody went there, right? It was just not something that people oh my gosh, like you could like, and now okay, there's like 10 coffee shops and rent is $1,800, right? This is a very recent phenomenon and it's leaving so many people screwed. So I'm just wondering if you could talk about that.
Absolutely. And I'd like to quote my colleague Diane Charity. Like she said, we hate that they say affordable housing. We say able. She says able to afford, right? Which is where it should start from. And they say affordable housing by some percentage of what they have come up with, but like that doesn't fit. There are 40. I mean, half the city are renters or tenants.
48%, yeah,
that's right. And so and you see the population of homeless continually growing. I mean, there's now a new homeless union because of the rise that has happened, especially in COVID and what it means for public health. And so affordability, I don't think that they get it. It's kind of in the eyes of the beholder. And the worst part about that is that developers can come in and with the option to opt out and pay a fee or whatever it may be, especially if they have the money, then of course that's what they're going to do, right? So that they can make the housing that they want and charge that money that they want. What we need is it needs to be government sanctioned, right? It needs to be something that they put into place, because if developers or people who come in with the housing have a chance to opt out, they're going to opt out, right? When they can get more money and whatever cost they have to pay, it'll be covered by their profit and beyond that. And so, yeah, it's affordability. It needs to be redefined. And I know if it needs to be redefined here in Kansas City, it needs to be redefined across our nation. Most definitely, and especially in the context that we have made from other states and things like that. It's just a continuing story for every part of it. And then the affordable housing that you do have is usually filled up or it's not livable, right? You have conditions that people are not looking for, especially if you're raising children. You're afraid that they're going to be sick and that things will happen. It's mind-blowing. We need accessibility. It needs to be affordable. It needs to be safe. It needs to be healthy. And it's like hit or miss. Like you may have one of those things in a housing, in a place that's affordable, but you usually don't have them all. And, we don't have the enforcement behind that. It's a system, right? And the system keeps kicking you back to those different resources that are all saying the same thing and nobody's doing anything about it. And so we have no choice but to expose it. We're trying our best to get the city to see. We show up to these meetings, we show up in these spaces where they say to come and let your voice be heard, and they'll say that they're listening, but the proof is not in their action. And until it is, we'll keep showing up. And it's just a shame that, everybody's talking about the homelessness that has occurred since the pandemic, but no one has really pushed action. That requires immediate action, especially in this public health crisis. And, they want to push paper ordinances, and then they go back round and round, and we don't have time for that. People are out here dying.
Yeah. Well, speaking of how, maybe just showing up to a meeting isn't quite enough to really force them to listen or really hear your message. I've been very impressed by KC Tenants, by how effective they've been at forcing the media to show up, by forcing the cameras to be there to cover these actions. And I think it's something that, organizations around the country could learn a lot from, even when it comes down to the color scheme and logo and the uniformity of the look of the activists on the street. I think there's something that's almost very ingenious about the way that it's been designed. Here we see a clip of KC Tenants blockading Jackson County Courthouse, and this is just undeniably a very visual display of activism, something that, again, the KC Star reported on. These images we're seeing across the internet, and largely KC Tenants has been very successful at attracting the national media. It's been reported on quite heavily. So I'm just wondering if you have any insights into the way that you guys have been trying to force the media to cover these actions and the cruelty that is evictions, especially in the time of coronavirus, and generally just how other activist organizations in a similar vein could maybe learn from the way you guys have so successfully brought attention to these issues?
I think it starts from inside the organization. I mean, we feel like organizing is relational. And unless you can really make a connection with people, especially people who are going through a crisis and are directly impacted by these issues, then, you can't build that type of power or that type of base. And so to get people out there and to really get involved, it takes that relationship and building that. And that's first. And so once you have that, the media itself, if it wasn't for people like you guys, wanting to tell this story, it's not hard for us to get people out there. You guys care, you guys get it. And so then, then the government, that getting people to answer after you've exposed things or calling out things publicly, I mean, that's the part that gets them there. And so, using your contacts, being able to use people being willing to tell their personal stories in front of that camera, I think is the biggest part of really being heard, because anybody could tell you what's going on out here. But when you've got a single mother standing in front of the camera telling you her personal story, and that's actually living this right now, it becomes really real for people who think that, this is not, these people are lazy, or this happened to them because they're not doing this or not doing that. And then when you hear the stories, me having gotten sick and being sick with cancer, it's something that people can relate to, and how it affected me when I was in the process of trying to get things going. I mean, people can hear those real stories, and they're affected by it. I mean, and it's things that they try to sweep up under the rug. And so that's the biggest part, putting those real stories out there in front of real people, and being able to see that this is not, just in these sections. There's a lot of people going through this, and, across classes, not just lower class, but middle and upper. We've got people who are actually landlords that are part of KC Tenants because they see the effect and want and feel like their colleagues should do better. So, we represent everybody. If you don't feel those words, those personal stories when they're told, then it's got to be you, right? Because it's something we all can relate to. It's something that we're seeing across the country right now. And our government needs to show up. I mean, and not just on a local scale, but statewide and national. You see it all across the country, especially right now. And it's from the fact that this was not just a thing in the pandemic anyway. There were already millions of people who were going through homelessness or about to be homeless because of eviction and not making enough money, even when they're working 2 and 3 jobs to be able to pay the rent.
Well, that segues really well into my last question that I had for you. And honestly, I just wanted to get your reaction because my girlfriend is a local reporter at the Beacon, and she forwarded me a press release from Quentin Lucas this morning when he was teasing that he might be interested in running for the vacant Roy Blunt Senate seat after Roy Blunt announced he would not be seeking re-election. What's your reaction to that? And does it feel like blatant careerism after he's overlooked his role in Kansas City? Is that how you feel? What's your reaction?
Yeah, definitely. I think that KC Tenants as a whole, we were not any fool at all to the fact that, we had already figured kind of his actions and the way that he was moving, the direction he's moving in. I don't think it's any surprise to us that he is seeking higher legislature.
It always goes like that, but
we kind of called it before this happened. So you might want to focus on the job that you're in first right now, and at least make good on the promises that you've made there before you decide to move on. You're still going to need that support from the people who are here. Maybe if we could focus in the city first and make sure that people are not on the streets dying before we start thinking about career moves, I think that would be better.
Yeah. I think that's a great point. Absolutely. And Tiana, my last question for you is just generally what your opinion is right now on the state of the movement for housing for all. I feel like because Bernie Sanders really popularized the idea of Medicare for all, a lot of people really got excited about that possibility. However, I don't hear housing for all or a guaranteed housing talked about as much within leftist circles on, online progressive media, for example. And I'm just wondering if you could shed your insight into the state of the movement right now, and if there's been any wins on local levels where maybe cities or even smaller communities have guaranteed housing to their population.
It is, like I said, we do have connections to people across the country and the state, and it's a hard push. And we can get, certain people on board that really want to and believe in it, but trying to get the support that you need to pass it. We're still far from that, but there are housing movements that are growing and coming up and building strong, even across the whole nation. So, and they're making connections with each other and trying to build that power so that we can win, guaranteed housing, right? We need homes to be guaranteed. And in this climate, it's like a state of public health, right? I mean, we should all want people to be housed anyway. I think everyone should be in a home. It should be guaranteed to everybody as the very foundation. I mean, food, shelter, clothing is like basic and necessary. So I think it should be guaranteed, and we should all want it to be, because it does have a lot to do with our communities and where we live and what's happening in those communities. And without it, you will see things like crime rise, or, people trying to make sure that they have those things, and it becomes scary and it makes things worse, not better. So we should want to do it for all of us, and if the least of us is in trouble, then we all should be, worried about that. And no one left behind, I don't think. And I think that people should be able to live, especially when there's kids involved. And so I think it's a moral issue, right? About what's right. And, we need to be there for each other. And what this pandemic has told us, or showed us, if nothing else, is that, we are all connected, right? This spread really fast. It affected a lot of people. And, we need to make sure that the least of us is okay so that we can all be okay. And I think that that's something that we hadn't really got to see. And it showed us how quickly that could come about.
Well,
Absolutely.
Thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us today. We certainly appreciated your insight and sharing and also, of course, the activism that you and everyone at KC Tenants has been doing. As Michael in the chat said, KC Tenants is one of the prides of Kansas City. So just thank you for the work that you do, and we look forward to having you back on the show as things unfold.
Thank you.
And I just wanted to ask.
Really great things to tell you as we're moving things forward. So we got some things up our sleeves. We can't ever quit, and we won't.
Where can people go to support KC Tenants in any way that they possibly can, even if they're not from around here, if they maybe want to just support the work you guys are doing?
We are at kctenants.org. It's the website. KC Tenants on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook are all there. All of our links are connected, so you go to any of those places and you can get hold of us.
Awesome.
All right, awesome. Yeah, thank you so much for the work you guys are doing.
Our hotline is listed there on most of all those sites, definitely on the website. So if you need anything, if you need some help, if you're in a housing crisis, please call us.
Awesome.
Wonderful.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for the work you're doing. That was Tiana Caldwell of KC Tenants, and we were so glad to spotlight her and the great work that KC Tenants is doing. Obviously, especially with the pandemic raging, it's so important right now that we combat the violence of evictions, which are often state-sponsored, funded by our own tax dollars to
executed by the police department.
Exactly. So again, a huge shout out to KC Tenants, a huge shout out to Miss Tiana Caldwell. And once again, I really quickly just wanted to read this quote. Do you see it here?
Yeah, it's right there, but you're sharing your screen, so it's showing up as this. Yeah.
Here you go. Anyway, this is a quote from her article. Again, I read this at the beginning of the stream. She said, "Let's be clear about something. I've been living in crisis for a lot longer than the pandemic period. 12 million people across the country spend half their paychecks on the rent. A flat tire or a sick kid is all that separates people like me from eviction or homelessness. Capitalism and racism have created the conditions for our complete inability to respond to COVID-19 with any semblance of humanity." And I think that's just so correct, so well worded and well spoken. addressing and diagnosing these issues and the absolute lack of humanity in which they've been addressed by our increasingly capitalistic and corporate economy and country. So I just think it's a very important message.
Yeah, to paraphrase Tiana as well, today we need a rent suspension. Tomorrow we need a homes guarantee. So
Absolutely,
anyway,
absolutely.
Thanks to everybody for tuning in, and be sure to check out the KC Tenants website and get involved if you can. But yeah, thanks for everybody for tuning in.
Yeah, thanks so much for everyone tuning in. Make sure to subscribe if you have not already. And a big shout out to our patrons. You can join by clicking the link in the description. If you're watching right now, make sure to stay tuned. We'll be back again later tonight with good friend of the show, Kamali Rose of the Radical Democracy Show. Super excited to do that. So again, stay tuned. Make sure to subscribe, hit that notification bell if you have not already. And again, hit up the KC Tenants. I've included all the links in the description if you want to learn more about their mission or support them or buy a t-shirt. Do that. They really could use that support. And again, solidarity to the KC Tenants and all groups fighting the violence of evictions across this country right now. We really, truly stand in solidarity here at the Vanguard, one of the most important activist missions currently going on.
Yep, absolutely. Sign off on that 100%, and we'll be back in a few hours with another live stream. Peace out, guys.